The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountains as Commander Jake Morrison crouched behind a boulder, sweat mixing with dust on his weathered face. His team of 6 Navy SEALs had been tracking a high-value target for 3 days through the treacherous terrain of the Hindu Kush. The mission was supposed to be straightforward: locate and capture Malik Hassan, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on American forces. Morrison pressed his radio earpiece and whispered into his microphone. "Eagle Eye, this is Wolverine. Target compound in sight. Requesting final clearance for approach." The static crackled in his ear before the response came through clear and authoritative. "Wolverine, you are cleared hot. Execute at your discretion." The compound sat nestled in a valley below, surrounded by mud brick walls that had stood for decades. Smoke drifted lazily from a chimney, suggesting the inhabitants were awake and active. Morrison studied the layout through his binoculars, counting at least 4 armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Intelligence reports indicated Hassan was inside with a small security detail, planning his next operation against coalition forces. Sergeant Maria Vasquez crawled up beside Morrison, her rifle slung across her back. She had been with the team for 2 years and had proven herself countless times in combat. "Sir, Torres spotted movement on the east wall. Looks like they're changing guard rotations every 30 minutes. Morrison nodded, appreciating the detailed observation. Timing would be everything in this operation. The team had rehearsed this type of assault dozens of times. Petty Officer Chen would provide overwatch from the ridge they currently occupied, while Morrison led the main assault team down into the valley. Petty Officers Martinez and Johnson would secure the rear exit, ensuring no one escaped during the chaos. The plan was textbook SEAL tactics: fast, precise, and overwhelming. Morrison checked his watch. They had been in position for 45 minutes, long enough to establish patterns and identify potential threats. The guards seemed relaxed, unaware that death was watching them from above. One guard sat against the wall, smoking a cigarette and talking on his phone. Another walked lazily around the compound's perimeter, his rifle hanging loose at his side. "This feels too easy," whispered Torres, the team's youngest member. He had joined them fresh from SEAL training 6 months ago and still carried the nervousness that came with real combat operations. Morrison understood the feeling. In his 12 years as a SEAL, he had learned to trust his instincts, and something about this mission felt different. The intelligence briefing had been unusually detailed. They knew Hassan's exact location, his daily routine, even the number of men guarding him. Such precise information was rare in Afghanistan, where intelligence was often unreliable and constantly changing. Morrison pushed the doubt from his mind. They had a job to do, and overthinking would only create problems. Vasquez pointed to a section of the wall where the mortar between stones had crumbled. "Entry point, sir. We can breach there without explosives." Morrison studied the spot through his scope. It would require them to cross 30 meters of open ground, but it was their best option for a silent approach. The radio crackled again. "Wolverine, this is Eagle Eye. Drone surveillance shows no additional hostiles in the area. You have a clean approach vector." Morrison felt some relief. Air support had been watching the compound for hours, and their thermal imaging would have detected any hidden threats. Chen settled into his sniper position, adjusting his rifle scope for the distance and wind conditions. His job was to eliminate any guards who posed a threat during the assault. Morrison had complete confidence in Chen's abilities. The man had never missed a shot when it mattered. Morrison gathered his team for final instructions. "Remember, Hassan is priority 1. We need him alive for interrogation. Anyone else in that compound is considered hostile unless proven otherwise. Watch your backgrounds and maintain communication at all times." The team nodded in understanding. They had worked together long enough to operate almost telepathically. The descent into the valley took 20 minutes of careful movement. Each step was calculated to avoid loose rocks that might alert the guards. Morrison's heart rate remained steady despite the danger. Years of training had taught him to control his physical responses during high-stress situations. As they reached the valley floor, Morrison could hear voices from inside the compound. Someone was arguing in Pashto, their voices carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. He couldn't understand the words, but the tone suggested tension among the occupants. Martinez and Johnson split off to circle around to the rear of the compound while Morrison, Vasquez, and Torres approached the identified breach point. The guard who had been smoking was no longer visible, having moved to another section of the wall. Morrison counted this as fortunate, one less immediate threat to neutralize. The breach point was exactly as Vasquez had described. The ancient mortar had weathered away, leaving gaps large enough for a person to squeeze through. Morrison tested the stones carefully, ensuring they wouldn't shift and create noise during their entry. Through his earpiece, he heard Chen's voice. "Wolverine, I have eyes on two guards, southeast corner and north wall, both carrying AK-47s. Neither appears alert." Morrison acknowledged the information and signaled his team to prepare for entry. Torres positioned himself at the breach point, ready to provide covering fire if needed. Vasquez checked her equipment one final time: flashbang grenades, zip-tie restraints, and medical supplies. Morrison felt the familiar calm that came before action. His mind focused entirely on the mission objectives. The compound was larger than it appeared from the ridge. Multiple buildings connected by covered walkways created a complex layout that would require careful navigation. Morrison studied the shadows, identifying potential hiding spots and escape routes. A dog barked somewhere in the distance, causing everyone to freeze momentarily. Morrison held his breath, waiting to see if their presence had been detected. After 30 seconds of silence, he decided it was unrelated to their mission. The mission was about to begin in earnest. Morrison whispered into his radio one final time before action. "All units, this is Wolverine. We are committed. Execute on my mark." The response came back immediately from all team members, confirming their readiness. Morrison took one last look at the compound through the breach point, memorizing the layout and guard positions. In moments, they would be inside enemy territory with no backup except each other. It was exactly the kind of mission they had trained for their entire careers. Morrison slipped through the breach point with practiced silence, his boots finding solid ground without disturbing loose stones. The compound's interior was darker than expected, with narrow passages between buildings creating deep shadows. Vasquez followed immediately behind him, her weapon ready but pointed low to avoid accidental discharge. The smell hit them first, a mixture of cooking spices, diesel fuel, and something else Morrison couldn't identify. These compounds often served multiple purposes, housing families alongside military operations. Morrison reminded himself that civilians might be present, complicating their mission significantly. Torres squeezed through the breach and took position covering their rear. His breathing was slightly elevated, but his hands remained steady on his rifle. Morrison appreciated the young SEAL's composure under pressure. Many soldiers struggled with their first real combat operations, but Torres seemed to be adapting well. Through his earpiece, Morrison heard Martinez's voice. "Wolverine, rear exit secured." 2 guards eliminated silently, no alarm raised. Morrison acknowledged with 2 clicks of his radio, maintaining operational silence. Johnson's voice followed seconds later. "Courtyard clear from the back. I see movement in the main building, 2nd floor." Morrison processed the information quickly. Hassan was likely in that 2nd floor room, possibly planning operations or meeting with other Taliban commanders. The intelligence briefing had mentioned Hassan preferred elevated positions that offered views of approaching threats. A guard rounded the corner 30 feet ahead, walking casually while smoking another cigarette. Morrison froze against the wall, hand raised to signal his team to stop. The guard paused, seeming to sense something unusual, then continued his patrol route without investigating further. Chen's voice crackled through the radio. "Wolverine, guard eliminated on the north wall. You have clear passage to the main building." Morrison felt grateful for Chen's precise shooting. The sniper had likely saved them from a potentially dangerous encounter. Vasquez pointed to a staircase leading to the 2nd floor of the main building. The wooden steps looked old and potentially noisy, but it was their most direct route to the target. Morrison studied the approach, identifying cover positions they could use if the operation went badly. The sound of voices grew louder as they approached the main building. Morrison could distinguish at least 3 different speakers, all male, discussing something in urgent tones. He wished the team's translator was present, but operational security had limited the mission to essential personnel only. Morrison signaled Vasquez to cover the staircase while he and Torres advanced to the building's entrance. The door was partially open, revealing a narrow hallway lined with doors. Traditional Afghan carpets covered the floors, which would help muffle their footsteps. Suddenly, a child's cry echoed from somewhere inside the building. Morrison's blood went cold. Children in the compound meant the mission parameters had just changed dramatically. Rules of engagement strictly prohibited endangering civilians, especially children, regardless of the military value of the target. Torres looked at Morrison with questioning eyes. The young SEAL understood the implications. They might need to abort the mission if civilian casualties became likely. Morrison weighed their options quickly. They had come too far and invested too much intelligence to retreat without attempting capture. Morrison made a tactical decision. He whispered into his radio, "All units, children present in the compound. Exercise extreme caution. Positive target identification required before any engagement." The team acknowledged his transmission immediately. They moved through the hallway methodically, checking each room they passed. Most were empty, containing only basic furniture and personal belongings. Morrison noted family photographs on walls and children's toys scattered on floors. This was definitely a mixed-use compound, housing families alongside military operations. The voices grew clearer as they approached the staircase. Morrison could now distinguish Hassan's voice from intelligence recordings they had studied during mission preparation. The target was definitely present, along with at least 2 other men discussing weapons shipments and attack timing. Vasquez positioned herself at the bottom of the staircase, ready to provide covering fire if needed. Morrison and Torres began their ascent, testing each step carefully to avoid creaking sounds. The old wooden stairs groaned slightly under their weight, but held firm. Halfway up the staircase, Morrison heard new voices from the room above. Someone was giving detailed instructions about explosive device placement in American patrol routes. The intelligence value of this conversation was enormous. They were potentially preventing multiple attacks on coalition forces. Torres tapped Morrison's shoulder and pointed to a window visible from their position. Chen had repositioned himself to provide overwatch on the 2nd floor, his rifle trained on potential escape routes. Morrison felt reassured knowing their sniper was watching over them. The conversation upstairs suddenly stopped. Morrison froze on the staircase, wondering if they had been detected. After several tense seconds, the voices resumed, but with a different tone. Someone was asking about guard positions and expected check-in times. Morrison realized they were running out of time. The guards would eventually be missed, and Hassan's security protocols would likely include communication schedules. They needed to act quickly before their presence was discovered. Through his earpiece, Johnson's voice provided an update. "Wolverine, I have visual on 3 adult males in the target room. One matches Hassan's description from briefing photos. No children visible on the 2nd floor." Morrison felt relief knowing they could proceed without endangering innocent civilians. Morrison reached the top of the staircase and peered around the corner. A long hallway stretched ahead with several doors on each side. Light and voices came from a room at the far end, confirming the target's location. The hallway was narrow, offering limited cover, but also restricting movement for potential defenders. Torres moved up beside Morrison, ready to provide support during the final approach. Morrison checked his equipment one more time: flashbang grenades, zip-tie restraints, and his sidearm. Everything was secure and ready for immediate use. The team was perfectly positioned for assault. Chen provided overwatch from outside, Martinez and Johnson secured the rear exit, and Vasquez covered their primary escape route. Morrison had executed similar operations dozens of times, but each one carried unique risks and challenges. Morrison whispered final instructions to Torres. "Follow my lead. Hassan is priority 1, alive. Anyone else is hostile unless they surrender immediately. Stay low and watch for crossfire angles." Torres nodded his understanding, his young face showing determination mixed with natural nervousness. The voices from the target room continued discussing attack plans against American forces. Morrison could hear details about timing, locations, and expected casualties. Every second they delayed meant more American soldiers at risk from future attacks. Morrison took a deep breath and prepared to move down the hallway. The mission was entering its most dangerous phase: close quarters combat in an unknown environment with potential civilian complications. Years of training had prepared him for this moment. But real combat always carried unpredictable elements. He signaled Torres to begin the final approach. Morrison and Torres moved down the hallway like shadows, their training allowing them to cover ground quickly while maintaining complete silence. The wooden floorboards beneath their feet were old but solid, supporting their weight without betraying their presence through creaking sounds. As they approached the target room, Morrison could hear Hassan's voice more clearly. The Taliban commander was describing recent American patrol patterns and discussing optimal locations for roadside bomb placement. Morrison's jaw tightened as he listened to plans that would kill American soldiers if not stopped. Torres positioned himself against the wall beside the doorframe, ready to provide immediate support during the assault. Morrison checked his watch. They had been inside the compound for 12 minutes. Experience taught him that longer operations increased the likelihood of complications and discovery. Through the partially open door, Morrison could see 3 men seated around a low table covered with papers and maps. Hassan sat with his back to the door, identifiable by his distinctive gray beard and traditional Afghan hat that matched intelligence photographs. 2 younger men flanked him, both armed with pistols visible in shoulder holsters. Morrison's radio earpiece crackled softly. "Wolverine, this is Chen. I have clear shots on 2 targets through the window. Awaiting your signal." Morrison clicked, his radio twice in acknowledgement, knowing his sniper was ready to provide immediate support if the operation went sideways. The tactical situation was nearly perfect. Hassan was isolated with minimal security, unaware of the danger surrounding him. Morrison had conducted similar captures successfully throughout his career, but something about this mission continued to feel different. The intelligence had been too precise, the security too light for such a high-value target. Morrison pushed his doubts aside and focused on the immediate task. He pulled a flashbang grenade from his vest, preparing to disorient the targets before making entry. The device would create several seconds of confusion, allowing his team to gain control of the room before anyone could react effectively. Torres readied his rifle, switching the selector to semi-automatic fire mode. His breathing remained controlled, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Morrison felt proud of the young SEAL's composure. Torres was performing like a veteran despite his limited combat experience. Hassan's voice grew more animated as he described a planned attack on a forward operating base. Morrison realized they were potentially preventing a major assault that could kill dozens of American soldiers. The intelligence value of this operation was becoming clearer with each passing moment. Morrison held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, signaling the countdown to Torres. On 0, he pulled the pin from the flashbang grenade and tossed it through the door opening. The device clattered across the floor for 2 seconds before detonating in a brilliant explosion of light and sound. The blast was deafening even through Morrison's hearing protection. Shouts of confusion and alarm echoed from the room as the 3 men scrambled to understand what was happening. Morrison charged through the doorway with Torres immediately behind him, their weapons trained on the disoriented targets. "Nobody move! American forces!" Morrison shouted in English, then repeated the command in broken Pashto. Hassan stumbled, backward from the table, temporarily blinded by the flashbang but reaching for a weapon on a nearby shelf. One of his companions drew his pistol despite his obvious disorientation. Torres reacted instantly, firing 2 precise shots that dropped the armed man before he could aim his weapon. The sound of gunfire echoed through the building, alerting everyone in the compound that the assault had begun. Morrison knew they now had limited time before reinforcements arrived. Hassan continued reaching for the shelf weapon, despite Morrison's commands to stop. Morrison tackled the Taliban commander, driving him to the floor and away from the rifle. Hassan was stronger than expected for his age, struggling fiercely against Morrison's attempts to restrain him. The 3rd man in the room raised his hands in surrender, shouting something in Pashto that Torres couldn't understand. Morrison quickly zip-tied Hassan's hands behind his back, while the Taliban commander continued shouting what sounded like warnings or orders to unseen Confederates. Torres secured the surrendering man with restraints while keeping watch on the door for potential threats. The gunfire had definitely alerted the compound's remaining defenders, and Morrison could hear running footsteps and shouting voices from other parts of the building. Morrison's radio crackled with urgent reports from his team. "Wolverine, this is Martinez. We have multiple hostiles approaching the rear exit. Engaging now." The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through Morrison's earpiece, confirming that the operation had transitioned from stealth to open combat. Chen's voice followed immediately. "Wolverine, I count 6 armed individuals moving toward the main building. 2 eliminated, 4 still advancing on your position." Morrison appreciated the precise information from his sniper, but the numbers were concerning. Intelligence had suggested minimal security. Vasquez's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Morrison, we've got problems down here. More guards than expected, and they're organized. This wasn't a routine security detail. They were ready for us." Morrison felt his earlier concerns about the mission crystallizing into immediate danger. Torres helped Morrison lift Hassan to his feet. The Taliban commander had stopped struggling but continued glaring at his captors with undisguised hatred. Hassan spoke English better than intelligence reports indicated, Morrison realized, as the man began cursing them fluently in American profanity. Morrison quickly searched the papers on the table, stuffing maps and documents into his cargo pockets. The intelligence value was enormous, detailed plans for multiple attacks, supply routes, and communication protocols. Even if the mission became complicated, this information would save American lives. Footsteps pounded up the staircase toward their position. Morrison and Torres positioned themselves to defend the doorway while keeping their prisoners secured. The narrow hallway would force attackers to approach in single file, giving the SEALs a tactical advantage despite being outnumbered. The first attacker appeared at the far end of the hallway, firing wildly with an AK-47. Torres returned precise fire, forcing the man to duck back around the corner. Morrison could hear more voices and movement, suggesting additional attackers were positioning themselves for assault. Morrison spoke rapidly into his radio. "All units, we are compromised and under fire. Execute immediate extraction to primary rally point. Chen, we need covering fire on the 2nd floor." The responses came back quickly, confirming that all team members were engaged in combat. Hassan suddenly shouted something in Pashto that echoed through the building. Morrison didn't understand the words, but the tone suggested Hassan was giving orders to his men. Morrison realized the Taliban commander was trying to coordinate a counterattack from his captive position. Torres fired several more rounds down the hallway, keeping the attackers pinned behind cover. Ammunition would become a critical factor if the firefight continued much longer. Morrison calculated they had perhaps 10 minutes of sustained combat capability before needing to withdraw. The surrendering prisoner suddenly lunged toward a hidden weapon Morrison had missed during the initial room clearing. Torres reacted instantly, striking the man with his rifle butt and dropping him unconscious. Morrison mentally noted the mistake. Thorough room clearing was essential, especially under pressure. Chen's rifle cracked repeatedly from his overwatch position, each shot precisely aimed at threats Morrison couldn't see from inside the building. Morrison trusted his sniper completely, knowing Chen would eliminate as many attackers as possible before they reached the main building. Morrison made a tactical decision. Staying in the room would eventually result in being overwhelmed by superior numbers. They needed to fight their way to the extraction point while maintaining control of their high-value prisoner. It would be dangerous, but remaining static guaranteed failure. Morrison grabbed Hassan and pushed him toward the window facing Chen's position. If they could signal their sniper, Chen might be able to provide covering fire for their escape. Torres continued engaging targets in the hallway while Morrison prepared Hassan for movement. The mission was rapidly becoming more complex than anyone had anticipated. Morrison dragged Hassan toward the window while Torres maintained suppressive fire down the hallway. The window was small and high, requiring them to climb onto furniture to reach it effectively. Morrison could see Chen's muzzle flash in the distance as the sniper engaged multiple targets around the compound perimeter. Hassan resisted every step, trying to slow their movement and give his men time to organize a rescue attempt. Morrison had dealt with uncooperative prisoners before, but Hassan seemed unusually determined and organized for someone who had just been captured. The Taliban commander's behavior suggested this situation might not be as unexpected as it appeared. Torres reloaded his rifle while Morrison covered the hallway. 3 more attackers had joined the assault, firing automatic weapons in controlled bursts rather than the wild spraying typical of untrained fighters. Morrison realized they were facing experienced combatants, possibly foreign fighters or specially trained Taliban units. Through the window, Morrison could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions around the compound. His team was engaged in a full-scale firefight against what appeared to be a much larger force than intelligence had predicted. Morrison's radio crackled with constant updates from his team members, each reporting contact with multiple hostiles. Johnson's voice cut through the radio chatter with urgent information. "Wolverine, we've got vehicles approaching from the east. Multiple trucks with armed personnel. This is looking like a coordinated response, not random guards." Morrison felt his stomach tighten as he realized the implications of Johnson's report. Morrison quickly reassessed their tactical situation. The mission had transformed from a simple capture operation into a running battle against superior numbers. Extraction would require fighting their way through multiple defensive positions while protecting a prisoner who was actively trying to escape. Chen's voice provided more concerning intelligence. "Wolverine, I count at least 20 hostiles around the compound now. Some are setting up heavy weapons positions. We need to move immediately or risk being completely surrounded." Morrison knew his sniper's assessment was accurate. Chen had the best view of the overall tactical situation. Torres indicated his ammunition was running low. Morrison checked his own supply and realized they would need to conserve rounds carefully during their escape attempt. The firefight was consuming ammunition faster than anticipated, and resupply was impossible until they reached the extraction point. Hassan suddenly smiled despite his captive status, speaking in clear English for the first time. "Your intelligence was very good, Commander Morrison. Perhaps too good." Morrison felt ice in his veins as he realized Hassan knew his name and rank, information that should have been classified at the highest levels. Morrison grabbed Hassan by his shirt and demanded answers. "How do you know who I am?" Hassan's smile widened as he responded in perfect English with only a slight accent. "The same way I knew you would be here today, at this time, with exactly this team composition." The horrible realization hit Morrison like a physical blow. This wasn't a capture operation. It was a trap. Someone had fed Hassan detailed information about their mission, their approach routes, even their individual identities. Morrison's mind raced through the implications of such a massive intelligence breach. Torres overheard Hassan's confession and looked at Morrison with wide eyes. The young SEAL understood immediately that their situation had become exponentially more dangerous. They weren't just facing unexpected resistance, they were fighting for survival against an enemy who had been expecting them. Morrison's radio exploded with panicked transmissions. Martinez's voice was strained as he reported. "Wolverine, we're taking heavy fire from prepared positions. These guys knew exactly where we'd be. This is a setup." Similar reports came from Johnson and Vasquez, confirming Morrison's worst fears. Chen provided tactical updates that painted an increasingly desperate picture. "Wolverine, they're moving heavy weapons into position. I can see at least 2 machine gun teams and what looks like an RPG crew. We have maybe 5 minutes before they have us completely pinned down." Morrison made an instant decision that violated standard operating procedures but might save his team's lives. He spoke directly to Hassan in a voice filled with controlled fury. "You're going to call off your men and provide us safe passage, or I'm going to start shooting prisoners beginning with you." Hassan laughed genuinely, seeming to enjoy Morrison's anger. "Commander, you Americans are so predictable in your adherence to rules of engagement. You won't shoot an unarmed prisoner, and we both know it. Your own conscience won't allow such actions." Morrison realized Hassan was probably correct about his reluctance to execute prisoners, but the Taliban commander had underestimated Morrison's determination to save his team. Morrison drew his sidearm and placed it against Hassan's kneecap. "I won't kill you, but I'll make sure you never walk again." The threat seemed to get Hassan's attention. His confident smile faltered slightly as he recognized Morrison's serious intent. Hassan spoke rapidly in Pashto into a small radio hidden in his clothing, apparently giving orders to his men outside. Torres reported that the hallway attacks had temporarily ceased, suggesting Hassan's orders were being followed. Morrison felt cautious optimism that they might be able to negotiate their way out of the compound, though he remained suspicious of Hassan's cooperation. Morrison's radio brought mixed news from his team. "Wolverine, this is Vasquez. The immediate pressure is off, but we're still surrounded. They're maintaining positions but not advancing. Looks like someone called them off." Morrison acknowledged while keeping his weapon trained on Hassan. Chen confirmed the tactical pause from his overwatch position. "Wolverine, hostile movement is stopped, but they're maintaining defensive positions. This could be temporary. They might be regrouping for a coordinated assault." Morrison knew Chen was right to remain cautious. Morrison demanded answers from Hassan about the intelligence breach. "Who told you we were coming?" Hassan's expression showed satisfaction as he responded. "Someone much closer to your operation than you realize, Commander. Someone who wanted to send a message about American arrogance." The revelation that they had a high-level intelligence leak was almost as concerning as their immediate tactical situation. Morrison realized that other operations might be compromised, putting additional American forces at risk. The implications extended far beyond their current mission. Hassan continued speaking, seeming to enjoy Morrison's discomfort. "Your government thinks it can operate anywhere in the world without consequences. Today, you learn that Afghanistan has its own lessons to teach." Morrison wondered how many other missions had been compromised by this intelligence breach. Torres monitored the hallway while Morrison processed the strategic implications of Hassan's revelations. The mission had become about much more than capturing a single Taliban commander. They were now dealing with a systematic compromise of American intelligence operations. Morrison spoke into his radio with new urgency. "All units, we have confirmation of intelligence compromise. Assume all mission parameters are known to hostile forces. Maintain maximum caution during extraction." The responses from his team indicated they understood the severity of their situation. Hassan watched Morrison's face carefully, seeming to gauge his reaction to each revelation. "Your extraction helicopters won't be coming, Commander. We've prepared surprises for them as well." Morrison felt another wave of concern as he realized the full scope of the enemy's preparation. Morrison's mind raced through their limited options for escape. Morrison's radio crackled with an urgent transmission from Eagle Eye, their air support coordinator. "Wolverine, be advised that your extraction helicopters are taking heavy ground fire. 2 birds are down, 1 is retreating with damage. Extraction is currently impossible." Morrison closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the devastating news that confirmed Hassan's claims. Torres looked at Morrison with growing concern as the reality of their situation became clear. They were trapped in hostile territory with no immediate extraction capability, surrounded by enemy forces who had anticipated their every move. Standard SEAL training covered such scenarios, but the reality was far more challenging than any simulation. Hassan seemed pleased by Morrison's obvious distress at the radio transmission. "As I mentioned, Commander, we prepared thoroughly for your visit. Your helicopters encountered surface-to-air missiles positioned along all likely approach routes. American technology is impressive, but preparation and intelligence can overcome even superior equipment." Morrison realized they would need to reach an alternate extraction point or establish a defensive position until additional support could arrive. Either option required fighting their way through multiple enemy positions while maintaining control of their prisoner. The tactical challenges were enormous given their limited ammunition and numerical disadvantage. Chen's voice provided another update from his overwatch position. "Wolverine, I'm seeing reinforcements arriving from multiple directions. Vehicle convoys approaching from east and south. Estimated additional 40 to 50 fighters." Morrison felt the walls closing in as enemy numbers continued to grow beyond anything they could handle. Morrison made a difficult command decision. He spoke quietly to Torres while keeping Hassan under close watch. We're going to have to abandon standard extraction procedures and move overland to a secondary rally point. It's going to be dangerous, but staying here guarantees capture or death. Torres nodded his understanding while checking his remaining ammunition. Sir, what about the prisoner? Hassan's going to slow us down significantly, and he knows it. He might be counting on that to help his people catch us. Morrison appreciated Torres's tactical thinking, despite his relative inexperience. Morrison considered Torres's point carefully. Hassan was valuable intelligence, but protecting him during a running firefight would compromise their mobility and survival chances. Morrison weighed the intelligence value against his responsibility to get his team home safely. Hassan interrupted Morrison's thinking with another revelation. Commander, you should know that your base is also under attack at this moment. The intelligence we received included details about your operational security and defensive preparations. This operation was designed to eliminate your entire unit permanently. Morrison felt genuine shock at Hassan's words. If their forward operating base was under attack, additional support would be impossible, and other SEAL teams might also be in danger. The scope of the intelligence breach was far worse than Morrison had initially realized. Morrison's radio suddenly came alive with distant transmissions from their base. Through static and interference, he could hear reports of indirect fire and coordinated ground assault. The transmissions confirmed Hassan's claims about the attack on their home base, eliminating any hope of immediate reinforcement. Torres moved to the window and confirmed Chen's reports about approaching enemy vehicles. Sir, I can see at least 6 trucks loaded with fighters. They're positioning themselves to cut off our escape routes systematically. This is definitely a coordinated operation designed to trap us here. Morrison realized that Hassan's capture had been the bait in an elaborate trap designed to eliminate his entire team. The Taliban commander had never been the real target. Morrison and his SEALs were the actual objective. Someone had orchestrated this operation with detailed knowledge of American tactics and procedures. Hassan watched Morrison's face as understanding dawned about the true nature of their mission. You begin to understand, Commander. Your intelligence services believed they were hunting us, but we were actually hunting you. The student has become the teacher in this particular lesson. Morrison struggled with the tactical implications of fighting their way out while maintaining control of Hassan. The Taliban commander was clearly expecting rescue and might try to escape during any firefight. Morrison couldn't afford to lose Hassan after everything. His team had sacrificed to capture him. Chen's rifle cracked repeatedly from his overwatch position as enemy fighters attempted to advance on the main building. Wolverine, they're testing our perimeter. I'm engaging targets, but they're using coordinated movement patterns. These aren't typical Taliban fighters. Someone trained them well. Morrison realized they were facing professional military tactics rather than the guerrilla warfare typical of Taliban operations. The enemy's coordination and equipment suggested foreign military advisors or specially trained units. The mission had become exponentially more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Vasquez's voice cut through the radio chatter with urgent information. Morrison, we found communication equipment in the rear building. These guys have been coordinating with multiple units across the province. This operation involves way more than just local fighters. Morrison processed Vasquez's discovery while maintaining security on Hassan. The communication equipment suggested this trap had been coordinated at a regional or national level, requiring significant resources and planning time. Someone with high-level access had been feeding intelligence to the enemy for an extended period. Johnson reported from his position at the rear exit. Sir, they're bringing up heavy weapons. I can see what looks like a recoilless rifle being positioned on the ridge opposite Chen's location. They're planning to overwhelm our overwatch position. Morrison realized that Chen's sniper position was about to come under direct attack from heavy weapons. Without Chen's overwatch, the team would lose their most effective defensive capability. Morrison needed to make critical decisions about team positioning and tactics immediately. Torres suggested using Hassan as a human shield during their movement, knowing the Taliban fighters would hesitate to shoot their own commander. Morrison rejected the suggestion immediately, despite its tactical value. Using prisoners as human shields violated everything Morrison believed about professional military conduct. Hassan seemed to read Morrison's thoughts and spoke with evident satisfaction. Your adherence to rules and morality will be your downfall, Commander. My men have no such limitations when fighting invaders on our soil. They will sacrifice anything necessary to achieve victory. Morrison's radio brought more concerning news as Martinez reported heavy casualties among the downed helicopter crews. Wolverine, both bird crews are taking casualties. The enemy is executing wounded Americans rather than taking prisoners. They're not following any rules of engagement. Morrison felt anger building at Hassan's men's treatment of wounded Americans, but he forced himself to remain focused on tactical necessities. Emotional reactions would only compromise his decision-making when his team needed clear leadership most desperately. Chen's voice cut through Morrison's thoughts with urgent, tactical information. Wolverine, that recoilless rifle is almost in position. I need to relocate immediately or risk being eliminated. Give me 2 minutes to displace, then I'll provide covering fire for your movement. Morrison realized their window for escape was closing rapidly. Once Chen lost his overwatch position, enemy fighters would be free to advance on the main building without fear of precise sniper fire. Morrison needed to coordinate his team's movement perfectly to have any chance of escape. Morrison made his final preparations for what would likely be the most dangerous phase of their mission. Hassan watched with evident satisfaction, clearly expecting to be rescued during the coming firefight. Morrison was determined to deny Hassan that satisfaction while getting his team to safety. Morrison gathered his team for what he knew would be their final push to escape the compound. Through his radio, he coordinated with each team member for simultaneous movement toward the primary rally point located 2 kilometers north of their current position. The route would take them through open terrain under constant enemy observation, but remaining in the compound guaranteed eventual defeat. Chen's rifle fell silent as the sniper began his relocation to avoid the incoming recoilless rifle attack. Morrison felt exposed without his overwatch protection, knowing enemy fighters would immediately begin advancing on their position. Time was running out faster than ammunition, and Morrison needed to make critical decisions about Hassan's fate. Torres positioned himself at the window, ready to provide covering fire during their initial movement. Morrison could see the determination in the young SEAL's eyes despite their desperate circumstances. Torres had proven himself repeatedly during the mission, performing like a veteran despite his limited combat experience. Hassan continued watching Morrison's preparations with evident satisfaction. Commander, you can still surrender and save your team's lives. My men will treat prisoners according to international law if you lay down your weapons voluntarily. Morrison knew Hassan was lying when the treatment of the helicopter crews had proven enemy intentions. Regarding American prisoners, Morrison made a decision that violated every instinct about prisoner handling. He looked directly at Hassan and spoke with cold certainty. You're coming with us, but if you slow us down or try to escape, I'll shoot you myself. Your intelligence value doesn't justify getting my men killed. Hassan's confident expression faltered slightly as he recognized Morrison's serious intent. The Taliban commander had expected American adherence to rules of engagement to protect him, but Morrison's desperation had overridden standard procedures. Hassan realized his captors might actually sacrifice him to save themselves. Morrison's radio crackled with reports from his team, confirming their readiness for movement. Each team member had established their route to the rally point and prepared their remaining ammunition for the firefight ahead. Morrison felt pride in his team's professionalism, despite their impossible circumstances. Vasquez reported from her position covering the main staircase. Morrison, they're moving heavy weapons into the courtyard. I can see at least 2 machine gun crews setting up overlapping fields of fire. They're planning to cut us down the moment we leave this building. Morrison realized the enemy was implementing classic military tactics to trap them inside the building before overwhelming their position with superior firepower. The coordination suggested professional military training rather than typical Taliban operations. Someone with extensive tactical knowledge was directing this assault. Chen's voice cut through the radio chatter with urgent information. Wolverine, I'm taking fire from multiple directions. The recoilless rifle opened up on my old position just as I displaced. These guys have been watching us longer than we realized. Morrison felt grateful for Chen's timing and tactical awareness. Morrison decided to implement a desperate gambit that might confuse enemy expectations. Instead of attempting to fight their way out through the main exit, he would lead his team through the breach point they had used to enter the compound. Enemy forces might not be watching that route as carefully. Torres covered Morrison as he forced Hassan toward the breach point. The Taliban commander resisted every step, clearly hoping to delay their movement until his rescue arrived. Morrison solved the problem by threatening to drag Hassan unconscious if necessary. Knowing speed was more important than Hassan's cooperation. Johnson and Martinez coordinated their movement from the rear exit to provide covering fire for Morrison's team. The sound of automatic weapons echoed through the compound as both SEALs engaged multiple targets attempting to advance on their position. Morrison could hear the distinctive sound of AK-47s responding to his team's disciplined fire. Morrison reached the breach point and surveyed the terrain beyond the compound walls. Enemy positions were visible on multiple ridgelines, but the immediate area appeared temporarily clear. Morrison realized they would have perhaps 30 seconds of concealment before enemy observers spotted their movement. Hassan made a final attempt to escape by throwing himself sideways as they approached the breach point. Morrison reacted instantly, striking Hassan with his rifle butt and stunning the Taliban commander enough to continue their movement. Morrison had no patience left for Hassan's resistance attempts. Torres squeezed through the breach point first, immediately taking cover behind the boulder where they had originally observed the compound. Morrison pushed Hassan through next, following immediately behind while maintaining weapon-ready position. The Taliban commander was breathing heavily but appeared capable of continued movement. Chen's voice provided tactical updates as the team consolidated outside the compound walls. Wolverine, enemy forces are reacting to your movement. Multiple groups converging on your location from east and south. You have maybe 2 minutes before they establish visual contact. Morrison realized their brief advantage was disappearing rapidly. Enemy forces would soon surround their position, eliminating any chance of escape. Morrison needed to reach the rally point before enemy reinforcements could establish, blocking positions along their route. To Morrison's radio brought devastating news as Vasquez reported from inside the compound. Morrison, I'm trapped in the building. Too many hostiles between me and the breach point. Continue to rally point without me. Don't compromise the mission for one person. Morrison felt his heart sink at potentially losing one of his most experienced team members. Torres looked at Morrison with questioning eyes, waiting for orders about Vasquez's situation. Morrison faced the impossible command decision between saving one team member and protecting the rest of his unit. Every instinct demanded he rescue Vasquez, but tactical reality suggested it would result in total mission failure. Morrison made the hardest decision of his military career. He spoke into his radio with a voice he forced to remain steady. Vasquez, maintain your position and await opportunity. We'll establish overwatch from rally point and coordinate your extraction. Do not expose yourself unnecessarily. Hassan watched Morrison's anguish over leaving Vasquez behind and spoke with evident satisfaction. Command decisions are difficult, aren't they? Every choice has consequences that will haunt you forever. Welcome to the real cost of your war in Afghanistan. Morrison ignored Hassan's psychological warfare and focused on reaching the rally point alive. Torres provided rear security as they moved across open ground toward the ridgeline that offered their best chance of establishing defensive positions. Enemy pursuit was growing closer with each passing moment. Chen's rifle cracked repeatedly from his new position, engaging targets Morrison couldn't see. Wolverine, I'm slowing their advance, but ammunition is getting critical. Maybe 10 rounds left before I'm down to sidearm. Only. Morrison realized his sniper was making every shot count in their desperate situation. Morrison could see the rally point ahead, a rocky outcropping that offered defensive positions and concealment from multiple directions. If they could reach it, they might be able to establish a perimeter and call for emergency extraction. The distance seemed enormous under enemy fire. Torres suddenly stumbled and fell, clutching his leg where blood was spreading through his uniform. Morrison realized his youngest team member had been hit by enemy fire from an unseen position. Torres tried to continue moving despite his wound, showing courage that made Morrison proud of his team's character. Morrison faced another impossible decision about whether to carry Torres or maintain their movement speed. Hassan watched the unfolding drama with evident pleasure, clearly expecting Morrison's team to collapse under pressure. Morrison refused to give the Taliban commander that satisfaction. Morrison lifted Torres and continued toward the rally point, knowing the decision might cost both their lives. Hassan followed reluctantly, still hoping for rescue but understanding that Morrison's desperation had made him truly dangerous. Behind them, Automatic weapons fire echoed across the valley as their pursuers closed the distance. Morrison whispered into his radio with grim determination, "It's over." The words carried the weight of everything they had lost and sacrificed during the mission. Then impossibly, a single rifle shot cracked from the ridge above them, Chen's ghost rifle firing one last time to cover their escape to an uncertain fate.